what is our vision? And then we also have to understand what is our action plan. So on the side of vision, I think that we do have to come to grips with the fact that Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan won in a very profound way when they tried to convince people that there was no alternative. All too often, people think, well, this is the way that the system works. All of my life, I've heard that this is the best system, that some people are rich. Right? Some people who actually look like me have actually been elected president. Well, the system must work. I think it's critical for us to begin building vision that is ultimately counter-hegemonic, that begins to undermine the fundamental principles of capitalism and imperialism. And as we do that, I think it's important that we understand that this vision has to be more than just a wish list. It's not saying that we want free housing, free education, free healthcare. Socialism's not just where everything's free, right? We have to begin building a comprehensive vision that ultimately strings stuff together. And I think that that's particularly important now as we sort of understand that social movements, as they've developed over the past 30 years, have really been silent. So some folks work on affordable housing, other folks work on homelessness issues, some people work on healthcare access issues, some people work on immigrant rights, other people work against police brutality. I think we are now in a position where the ruling elite is very easily able to pick off different parts of the movement, give concessions to one section, to one movement, but then ultimately bring the boot of repression down on another section. It is critical for us to ultimately develop a vision that we're all committed to, where ultimately African Americans, when they understand and see the level of oppression that's taking place in the immigrant community, say, no, we're not going to accept that. Because we understand that after you're done deporting, terrorizing the people in the immigrant community, you're going to be coming after us. So we're going to stop it. We're going to nip this off in the bud right now. We ultimately have to develop that type of vision that allows people to see the interconnectedness. But we also have to develop that vision in a way that it ultimately very clearly undermines the principles of neoliberalism as it's played out over the last few years. So inasmuch as neoliberalism was centrally a process of trying to indoctrinate people around the ideas of individualism, of privatization, talking about the market being sort of the only possible solution, talking about generally that we want to have a limited government. Of course, that's a limited government in some instances, and maybe, a large government in other instances, but we're not going to talk about that. Generally, we want to have a limited government. We want to have deregulation, and then ultimately militaristic jingoism, right? If those were the central principles of neoliberalism, then our vision ultimately has to begin creating a clear alternative to that, so that people are not just understanding how it is that my own life is going to benefit, but how is it that communities are going to wind up being reconstructed? How is it that nations are ultimately going to wind up relating to one another in a different way? As we talked about, this concept, some of the leaders within power, we got together to read the Democracy Charter, and people were really excited, really impressed with it. But one of the comments that some of the members raised was that, and I think this builds off of a point that Jacqueline was raising, is that democracy is not enough. That the way that people understand democracy now is that they get to vote. And clearly, democracy has a radical tradition that has been usurped and co-opted. But ultimately, as political activists, we have to understand where we are. We don't get to invent the history in which we're going to be doing our organizing and our activism. We have to understand the historical context. What is the weight of this word democracy? And I think many people understand, many people who ultimately want to be on our side, see democracy as an opportunity to vote every once in a while for a select few people. Some of those votes will be counted, but never are the questions that people ultimately want to talk about, never are those issues on the ballot. So we never in San Francisco had a ballot initiative that said, do we want to engage in a strategic and structural process to stop the hemorrhaging of African Americans in San Francisco? There's never been a ballot initiative around that. There's never been a ballot initiative about whether or not we want to provide free, decent education for kids from kindergarten all the way through graduate school here in San Francisco. Never had that initiative. Ultimately, I think we have to begin looking at trying to push people's consciousness, not just to democracy. It's an important aspect of how it is that we want our new society to function. But ultimately, we have to be pushing around concepts of liberation, of interconnectedness, of self-determination. And so I think, just to bring the message from a lot of the members of power, we're interested in this idea of crafting our vision, but ultimately we have to be thinking in much broader terms. We also think that this particular period creates opportunities for us to be able to do that. And so I think building off of what Michael was saying, we have to understand that not only are we talking about vision, but we're also then talking about action. And I think the other thing that we've seen from folks time and time again is that they are looking, begging for opportunities to be able to take bold action at this moment. It is absolutely outrageous that the socialist left has not had a broad response to the economic crisis and to the billions, trillions of dollars that are going to the banks. It is incumbent upon us to develop vision and to put people out on the streets and to hold them to the fire that when they turn around and say that there's no money for education, there's no money for health care, there's no money for universal housing for everybody, that is a lie. And we demand that the money that is right now being used to perpetrate illegal wars against other people around the world, that all the money that went to the banks ultimately should be used to reconstruct society in the vision that we want. So, in closing, to me, I think that it is really important in this conversation to understand that historical break that I was referring to earlier. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of young organizers, mostly of color, who have been spending the last 10, 15 years building organizations like Power all across the country. We have not had the benefit of being mentored, trained, and schooled by older comrades or having the benefit of being able to be in socialist organization. So we are left alone trying to figure out the new historical contours that are opening up in front of us. It seems to me that one of the challenges that is in front of us is how is it that we begin to bridge that divide. It's an important step that we take here today, but I think that it's critical that we figure out action plans that ultimately allow us to be in these rooms together so that the energy, enthusiasm, wisdom, and insight that come from younger folks are able to be matched with the energy, insight, wisdom from older comrades. Thank you very much.